It seemed like a watershed moment when the International Criminal Court issued arrest warrants last year accusing Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu and former Defense Minister Yoav Gallant for crimes against humanity. Months later, there are questions why Netanyahu and Gallant are still free men. Global anger over Israel's war in Gaza has reached a boiling point, and then some. With continued bombing, killing, starvation, abduction, and displacement, justice for victims of war in Gaza seems long overdue. People want to see action. An earlier decision by the International Court of Justice obliging Israel to facilitate the delivery of aid into the Strip was basically ignored. And for nearly 2 months now, the only thing that has entered Gaza is nothing. No food, water, fuel, medical kits, shelters, nothing to sustain life in the decimated Strip. People questioned the abilities of the world's top courts, and the limitations of international law became more evident. The ICC decision had also included arrest warrants for Hamas leaders, all of whom are likely dead. And all of that seemed to have very little impact. But in more recent months, civil society groups and grassroots legal coalitions have begun to take matters into their own hands. The Hind Rajab Foundation has been making appeals all around the world for the arrest of Israeli war crime suspects abroad. In the UK, various legal cases are in the works to prosecute dual citizens who may have committed crimes in Gaza. And even in Israel, one historian has taken on the painstaking task of documenting and archiving alleged war crimes committed by the military and by the authorities. The question is, how effective are these efforts really? This is Beyond the Headlines, and I'm your host, Nada Al-Tahir. In this episode, we look at the attempts being made locally and internationally to hold alleged Israeli war criminals to account. We ask how slow justice can deliver any justice at all, and whether it's enough to protect civilians from harm. Earlier this month, Netanyahu, an accused war criminal in the eyes of the law, was welcomed by US President Donald Trump in the White House. Israel nor the US are party to the Rome Statute that governs the ICC, but 125 other countries are. This means that these countries would have to arrest Netanyahu or Gallant if they entered their borders, and yet, some have already seemed to absolve themselves of this responsibility. French President Emmanuel Macron said the Israeli Prime Minister enjoys, quote, immunity from the arrests. The Belgian Prime Minister also said Netanyahu wouldn't be arrested because political considerations are more important than ethical ones. And Hungary said it would withdraw from the ICC altogether. So how can the international community take such a hesitant position when the war in Gaza has killed more than 50,000 people, destroyed entire neighborhoods, starved a population, and caused Israel to be accused of facilitating a genocide? I spoke to former ICC prosecutor Luis Moreno Ocampo about the potentials and the limitations of international law when it comes to Israel's actions in Palestine. There's so much documented evidence right now of Israel's actions in Gaza and the West Bank to the point where it's practically being live-streamed. And yet, despite this, and despite the ICC decision last year for the arrest warrants, there haven't really been any repercussions that we see. Why is that?
The most important aspect that happened in Gaza in legal terms is that at the same time that the conflict was unveiling, the one court, the International Court of Justice, which is a court who solves conflict between states, ruled that there is a risk of genocide in Gaza. That's really important. And then, on the other side, another court, the International Criminal Court, issued arrest warrant for crimes against humanity and war crimes against one leader of Hamas, who still considered not sure is dead, and Prime Minister Netanyahu and former Minister of Defense Gallant for a war crime. So global community is represented by judges, and they are saying this could be criminal. They are not still convicting someone. There are different interests trying to diminish the value of that. But we should not. We should not. These are the two biggest courts in the world saying there are very crimes. There are serious reasons to believe crimes are committed in Gaza. Then, arrest warrant. The arrest warrant issued by the court have impact already. There are debates in Israel because Prime Minister Netanyahu knows that one way for him to avoid the International Criminal Court is to be investigated in Israel itself. So if Israel open an investigation on the same facts against Prime Minister Netanyahu, the court in the ICC will be stopped, will be inadmissible. The problem is Prime Minister Netanyahu is fighting with the Attorney General of Israel, who want to organize a commission of investigation with the Supreme Court. And Prime Minister Netanyahu is fighting with them because he thinks, they will use that to remove me. And that investigation is because the ICC started the investigation. So regarding the repercussions, you have to understand, yes, Netanyahu is not in jail, but Netanyahu is under a lot of fire.
Can you explain how this works? Does the ICC's arrest warrant for Netanyahu become ineffective if the Israeli Attorney General decides to prosecute him?
The International Criminal Court was created with the idea not to replace national courts. On the contrary, to intervene when national courts fail to act. So this is called the principle of complementarity. As soon as a national court takes genuine action, the case before the ICC became inadmissible. So Netanyahu does not like to go to ICC. Therefore, one option he has is to force or to promote a genuine investigation in Israel. And he discussed the idea, but Israel Attorney General is trying to organize a group of investigation with the Supreme Court. And there are tensions in Israel between the Netanyahu and the Supreme Court. Therefore, Netanyahu is refusing that because he felt that would be like a plot against him, to remove him. So Netanyahu in some way had to choose what I prefer, to be investigated by the ICC at The Hague or by the Israel prosecutors and judges. And right now, he's using his influence to get support from US in particular, but also European countries, to in some way protect him. Interestingly, Macron, for the first time, he mentioned that there is immunity for Netanyahu. And you have to understand, whatever Macron say about immunity is not helping really, because who will decide if Netanyahu is immune or not immune before the ICC? The International Criminal Court judges, no Macron. So Macron say few words, but no, just words, no impact really. So to remove the warrant is not enough. So one option is this idea to start investigation in Israel.
If the ICC only issues the arrest warrants and they don't have an enforcement mechanism, can they still make local law enforcement and the national courts make these arrests or carry them out?
Well, in the national system, the judges are not controlling the police. The police are controlled by the executive branch, but they implement the judge's decision normally. At the global level, there is no global police, and then we cannot send troops to arrest Putin or Netanyahu. So we need states. But states have to decide what to do. For instance, if Trump make a deal with Iran, what will happen with Netanyahu? I think Netanyahu will have probably complications, but probably Trump would like to protect Netanyahu. So therefore, the way to do that politically is the UN Security Council can suspend the investigation of the ICC. The statute that created the International Criminal Court, the Rome Statute, gave authority to the Security Council to suspend investigation for 1 year. So the Security Council can suspend the investigation in order to facilitate the peace agreement in Gaza. So that would be a different way that the ICC arrest warrant has influence. It's not Netanyahu going to jail, but it's a factor that helped to finish the conflict and protect the victims.
In 2012, you rejected a bid by the Palestinian Authority to investigate Israeli war crimes as far back as 2002. But the decision was based on the fact that Palestine at the time was not a recognized state. Looking at what Israel has done since then, and even in the past 18 months, do you think that decision was the right one? And would you make that decision again?
Well, yeah, because in 2009, Israel was bombing Gaza. There was a truce. Minister of Justice of Palestine came to my office asking my intervention. And I told him, look, I understand how important it is, but I can offer two things, my impartiality and respect for the law. By respecting the law, I need to say you, you have a problem because Palestine is not considered a state by the UN. That's a problem because the statute say a state can accept jurisdiction. So I have a problem with that. And he was brilliant because instead to make to me political arguments, he made a legal argument. He said, prosecutor, let us brief you about our status. So he was briefing me for 3 years. And in this time, Palestine was understanding how to do it. And they moved to the UN Security Council, and they were paving the way. So when they say we finish our briefing, I just said, okay, I'm sorry. You are not a state for the UN. Go to the UN and come back. And that's exactly what they did. 6 months later, they went to the UN General Assembly that voted in favor that Palestine is a state. So 2 years later, Palestine became a state part of the Rome Statute, and that allowed the new prosecutor to open an examination and to open an investigation. And that process allowed the current prosecutor to indict Netanyahu. I never imagined that one day Netanyahu would be indicted.
As you say, this is part of a longer process, and it's complicated, it's nuanced, and has political considerations. But the problem is that so many people get killed in that time span.
I agree with you. I fully agree with you. That's why I told you the priority is to protect the Gaza people. That's why you say, in order to make a deal, a peace agreement, you need to suspend the investigations. I will agree on that. The problem is, bad things happen in the media, and there are people, it's like at the end we start to be used to the idea, okay, these people are bombing, they are starving, and it's okay. No, it's not okay. But the core decisions are helping, not the problem. That's why people have to focus. The real problem is political leaders. And that's why I believe it's interesting. This move, Mr. President Trump, to go to Iran is really a move that could make a difference.
But why can't we live in a world where the ICC and instruments of international law could have a more direct impact rather than one that takes years for us to see?
Basically, we are living in a world controlled by sovereign states. But this case, it shows the role, the intervention of the two courts, the International Court of Justice, solving conflicts in the states, and the ICC doing criminal investigation, is showing the world is changing. It's a slow change and complicated change, but it's changing. Normally, war, for 5,000 years, war was a mechanism to solve conflict between communities. The idea of international law just appeared in 1945, so 8 years ago. And the idea of criminal law, investigating leaders criminally, appeared just 22 years ago. So things are moving. So 5,000 years of violence, 80 years of legal management of relations between states, and 22 years of international criminal investigation. That's why it's an old system still working, war, and a new system emerging, law.
We're seeing a number of civil society groups and lawyers around the world pursuing the arrests of Israeli army soldiers and dual citizens who they say have committed war crimes in Gaza, like the case in the UK, where they filed a submission to the Metropolitan Police accusing 10 British dual nationals of that. Do you think that actions like this on a more local level is more impactful or direct in terms of accountability rather than courts like the ICC and the ICJ?
Well, you can try whatever you can, but even if the UK court prosecute and arrest a soldier, will not change dynamic in Gaza. So I believe ICJ and ICC, the International Court of Justice and the International Criminal Court, could help more because they are focused on the bigger topics. But for me, the bottom line is these two courts told us there are serious reasons to believe crimes were committed in Gaza. So, and there's no reaction on the international community. That's the problem today.
But can legal efforts on a national level make any impact? I discussed this with Paul Heron, the legal director and founder of the Public Interest Law Centre that is trying to prosecute 10 UK nationals who may have committed war crimes in Gaza. So, Paul, your centre, together with the Palestinian Centre for Human Rights, have filed a submission to the war crimes units of the UK's Metropolitan Police, and it's a 240-page report accusing 10 UK nationals of war crimes in Gaza. Why and how did you identify these 10 people in particular for prosecution? And why did you even think that it was important to do that in the first place?
Anybody who has a modicum of humanity would be outraged and appalled with what is going on in Gaza, seeing the kind of destruction, the killings, the targeting of civilians. One of the reasons for doing it was to do our little bit against the potential normalization, if you like, of what's going on. Normalization of not just breaching international law, but also that it just doesn't become the normal way of things. And I'm not saying that our small submission is going to stop that. It is part of a growing movement amongst lawyers and legal professionals. In terms of identifying the individuals that we have named in our report, the list that when we investigated who potentially has gone from Britain or are British Israeli dual nationals who potentially served in Gaza, the list was much longer. But through a detailed analysis of both who they are, who they served with, and potentially what they did in Gaza, we were able to narrow down the list to 10 suspects.
Can you be a little bit more specific about what the 10 people that you've identified have done in Gaza? Or is it simply the mere fact that they had participated in the Israeli offensive there?
First of all, I can't name the individuals, and I know you're not asking me to name the individuals. I also can't go into detail as to what we allege those individuals have done specifically, because potentially it could prejudice the case. However, the war crimes and the crimes against humanity that we allege the 10 individuals have been involved in include murder, include causing great suffering and also cruel treatments, of attacking civilians willfully, of forcible transfer and deportation, and attacks on humanitarian personnel. I mean, we've seen that most recently with the outrageous killing of medical workers, and also the extermination as it relates to cultural sites and also things like hospitals and other necessary infrastructure, which is all related to war crimes and crimes against humanity.
Is that even legal for UK dual nationals to serve in armies abroad?
There are laws which do prevent it, and those laws have been used in the UK courts against British nationals who've served for Kurdish forces in northern Iraq against ISIS. It's also been used against British nationals who have served in the conflict between Ukraine and Russia. Strangely, it hasn't been used against British nationals who have served in Gaza. And obviously, our report is trying to prompt some action. So either action further to the report that we've given, or the British authorities and the British state itself should be taking action on its own behalf. So there is a kind of hypocrisy going on. And obviously, for many people, they'd probably ask, well, why is that hypocrisy? And the clear reason is, from my perspective, what appears to be the case is, of course, the British state and the British government has provided regular shipments of armaments to the Israeli military, and also, crucially, has provided logistical support to the Israeli military in Gaza from bases in Cyprus.
So once you accuse people of committing war crimes like murder, displacement, or causing suffering, the counter-argument from what I've experienced is that they're just going to tell you it's part of war. It's an unfortunate side effect. What is your argument against those? And can you tell us where the case is right now?
In terms of where the case is at, first of all, as probably people who are listening to this will understand, sadly, the wheels of justice turn very slowly. The second point of your question, which I think is a really important issue, is the issue of Israeli military saying, well, it's all part of war. There are, unfortunately, innocent people who die in the course of war. And on one level, in the rules of law, that is true. However, the rules of law also state that there must be proportionality. It must be proportionate. And our arguments are they're not proportionate. So, for instance, I'll give you an example. A Hamas member enters a building in Gaza. The Israeli military have followed him presumably to kill him, and they bomb the building that he is entering, knowing full well that there are dozens of families, children, and innocents there. That is disproportionate and is a war crime.
So how are you piecing together the evidence? Are you including, for example, the digital evidence that was posted by the accused people themselves, as we had been seeing on social media platforms by soldiers across Gaza?
The work that we've done, we have been able to bring together all aspects of open source material, and we've searched and we have collated and we have analysed over the course of 8 months a whole series of reports of incidents, both from the United Nations, both from the International Red Crescent and the International Red Cross, from incidents involving that have been reported by Amnesty International and the Human Rights Watch, as well as, and quite correctly, the Israeli military use of TikTok, of Instagram, of Twitter, etc. team. It's all open source material, but of course, and this is why we've given it to the Metropolitan Police, the resources of the Metropolitan Police are far greater than a small, not-for-profit law centre.
Tell us what some of the challenges that you're expecting to face during the course of this filing.
The first one is obviously we're hoping that there is no restriction or limit on resources provided to the war crimes team. The second one is really to do with access to material. We would hope and we expect the war crimes team to have access to the material from the British government of their reports and their assistance to the Israeli military. Number three is we hope we will be keeping a close eye on potentially political interference. As you know, the British government has very much been backing the Israeli military throughout this conflict. And we hope that the war crimes team and the police officers who will investigate our case will not face that level of political interference over the course of the investigation. We will see, of course.
So why go after 10 people out of an entire army? What difference will 10 people make?
I mean, I go back to my original point. We are a small organisation with limited resources. So on one level, it is making a point. It is saying there has to be accountability and there is justice. And if you are a British national or a dual national who's thinking of going to Gaza, then think again. The point I would address, though, is whether law in and of itself is the most, can bring about the changes that we ultimately need. It can play a role, in my opinion, but ultimately it's for ordinary people in the Middle East. It's ordinary people campaigning and bringing about revolutionary change. And of course, I'm a lawyer. I can do my bit, but of course, everybody can do their bit as well.
Do you think that national institutions play, say, a bigger role or a more effective role than global institutions like the ICC or the ICJ? Or do you think that these two types of entities work in tandem together?
I think they can work effectively side by side. I think the actions in the ICJ and the ICC have inspired lawyers throughout the world to take action locally. And it may be that the local action that will be taken both in the UK and other parts of the world may affect change so that the ICC and the ICJ can be more effective. I think the difficulty we have is with both the international courts and the local courts is the states as in the individual states, whether it's the United States, whether it's Britain, whether it's other countries, which seem to be operating against law and against international law. In answer to your question, I think they can work in tandem, they can work together very successfully, and hopefully bring about accountability and prosecutions and some form of justice to the people of Palestine. But unfortunately, it is a slow justice. The other thing that needs to work in tandem is lawyers with movements, lawyers with campaigns, lawyers with ordinary mass movements to ensure that international law is obeyed and is protected and is not there just for Western powers, but is actually a genuine international law that holds everybody to account.
And in fact, more and more efforts are falling on the shoulders of, quote, ordinary people who are pushing for this change. Israeli historian Lee Mordecai had been compiling an archive to document what he describes as Israeli war crimes and genocide in Gaza. He explains that the reason for what appears to be the impunity for Israeli officials and soldiers stems from a deep-rooted misunderstanding of what happens in Gaza.
An academic book written in Hebrew, and one of the central theses there is that Gaza is invisible. I mean, it kind of like comes into our conscious as Israelis every once in a while, usually in context of around the violence, and then it just disappears. And that dynamic is definitely something I've been seeing in this war as well. I do not think you can understand this war without understanding media, propaganda, and the media cycle. You saw that also with Hussam Shabbat, the journalist from North Gaza who was killed like 2 weeks ago or something, right? He was killed. He drew a lot of attention for a very short amount of time. And then there was this attempt to try to portray him as a terrorist as opposed to a journalist. And the implication was, okay, if he is a terrorist, we could just kill him when we want to. But I think that shifted the message, that shifted the debate to whether it's okay or not okay to kill a journalist to was he a terrorist or not a terrorist.
Lee says that a big part of the reason that Israeli officials get away with alleged violations is because within Israel they tightly control the narrative. But the other reason is the protected status of the military within Israeli society.
So, I mean, you can definitely criticize the government. That's like very open in the media. But I mean, it stops when you get to the military. Another issue is what I would describe as plausible deniability, right? Which goes hand in hand with like purposeful ambiguity, right? So if you look at one of the key things in how the military is supposed to manage itself, rules of engagement. Who are you supposed to shoot? When are you supposed to shoot? Whoever you do. This is like consistent since the beginning of the war. There are no fixed rules of engagement. And every once in a while, they would kind of like say, okay, this is like too bad. We're going to like investigate this, right? Or we're even going to trial. But again, there's like this plausible deniability. So the command can say, oh, we didn't know.
In Lee's view, legal efforts to stop the status quo haven't had enough impact.
And part of the reason, this is also a big factor, is that there's no accountability, no international accountability as well. And for whatever reason, we can try to debate it. I mean, I have some answers. I don't think I have all of them. But there's no accountability. I think that is very clear. And if you look at the price Israel has paid, I mean, it's minor in all respects, right? And even diplomatically, right? So, I mean, yeah, sure, a lot of countries are maybe not happy and would say something. But, I mean, how many countries have actually, like, stopped selling weapons? How many countries have cut diplomatic ties? It's like almost nobody.
That's it for Beyond the Headlines. This episode was produced by Ban Barqawi and audio engineered by Arthur Edison. Yasmin Al-Taji is our assistant producer and Dua Farid is our editor, and I'm your host, Nada Al-Tahir. Thank you for listening.